The elevator doors open, and for the first time, you step into a building that feels much larger than yourself. Your badge says intern. The letters are small, but to you they represent possibility. You believe that if you work harder than everyone else, ask smart questions, and never complain, success will eventually notice you. During your first few weeks, you volunteer for every assignment. Stay late to perfect spreadsheets no one will remember, and quietly observe meetings where your presence barely seems to matter. Then one afternoon, you notice something important. A mistake appears in a presentation that will soon be shown to senior executives. You know it's wrong. You know exactly how to fix it, but the meeting starts in 4 minutes. Everyone in the room outranks you, and an uncomfortable question begins echoing inside your mind. Is speaking up worth the risk? You remain silent. Nothing dramatic happens. The meeting continues, people leave, and life goes on. Yet something far more significant has already changed. Without realizing it, you've just encountered the first unwritten rule of corporate life. Every organization runs on two systems. The visible system is made of job titles, policies, performance reviews, and organizational charts. But beneath it exists an invisible system built on timing, trust, influence, and perception. Learning your actual job is easy compared to learning this hidden system. From that day forward, you begin calculating every conversation. When should you challenge an idea? When should you listen instead? Which battles build credibility? And which ones simply create unnecessary resistance? Most people believe careers are shaped only by talent and hard work. Those things matter, but they are rarely enough on their own. Organizations reward people who not only solve problems, but also understand how decisions move through people, incentives, and relationships. The danger is that, over time, caution can slowly become your default setting. You stop raising difficult questions, stop sharing bold ideas, and begin optimizing for approval instead of growth. The people who build extraordinary careers aren't reckless, nor are they silent. They develop something far more valuable: judgment. They learn when patience creates opportunity, when courage creates trust, and when a single well-timed conversation can change the direction of an entire career. Looking back years later, you realize your internship was never really about learning Excel, presentations, or company processes. It was your first lesson in understanding how power, influence, and human behavior quietly shape every organization. And once you understand that invisible game, you stop trying to simply fit into the system, you begin learning how to navigate it with intention. A year passes, and the word intern disappears from your badge. You finally have your own desk, your own projects, and the satisfaction of knowing you actually contribute to the business. You understand the systems now. You know who makes decisions, which deadlines matter, and how to solve problems before they become emergencies. For the first time, you feel like a real professional. Then reality quietly introduces its next lesson. One Friday night, you're still in the office fixing a problem that could delay an important project. Hours later, the issue is solved because of your work. The following week, your team presents the results to senior leadership. The project is praised. The department is congratulated, but your name is never mentioned. You sit in the meeting wondering how something you built can succeed while you remain invisible. At first, it feels unfair. Then you begin noticing the same pattern everywhere. The people receiving the biggest opportunities aren't always the smartest or the hardest working. They're often the ones whose contributions are understood by the people making decisions. This is where many careers quietly split into two different paths. One person believes great work will eventually speak for itself. The other learns that great work needs to be communicated before it can create new opportunities. This isn't about taking credit for someone else's effort or becoming louder than everyone else. It's about recognizing that organizations cannot reward value they never clearly see. Visibility is not vanity, it is information. If decision makers don't understand the impact of your work, they cannot factor it into promotions, leadership opportunities, or strategic projects. Over time, you realize that your reputation is being built every day, even when no one says your name out loud. Every presentation, every conversation, every problem you solve, and every relationship you build becomes part of what psychologists call your career capital, the trust and credibility that compound over years. While technical skills help you enter the room, communication determines whether you're invited back. The professionals who consistently advance understand that influence grows when competence and visibility move together. They don't perform for attention. They make sure meaningful work reaches the people capable of creating meaningful opportunities. Looking back, you realize your career was never limited by your ability to work hard. It was limited only by how many people truly understood the value you created. Because in every large organization, success isn't determined solely by the quality of your work. It's determined by whether your work becomes visible enough to change the decisions of those who shape your future. The promotion finally arrives, and for a moment, it feels like everything you've worked for has paid off. Your title changes, your salary increases, and for the first time, people look to you for answers instead of instructions. You assume you're simply being rewarded for being the best performer on the team. Then Monday morning arrives, and you discover that your old job hasn't disappeared, it has multiplied. You're still responsible for your own work, but now you're expected to coordinate projects, resolve conflicts, hire new employees, attend endless meetings, and somehow inspire people whose motivations, fears, and ambitions are completely different from your own. No one hands you a manual explaining how to lead another human being. They simply give you authority and expect leadership to appear. Then comes the conversation every first-time manager remembers. One of your employees has been struggling for months. You know it, they know it. But every time you prepare to give honest feedback, you soften your words because you don't want to hurt them. Weeks become months, performance continues to decline, and the entire team quietly begins carrying work that isn't theirs. That's when you learn one of the hardest lessons in leadership. Avoiding difficult conversations doesn't protect people, it postpones problems until they become impossible to ignore. Great managers eventually realize that clarity is one of the highest forms of respect. Honest feedback, delivered with empathy, gives people the chance to improve. Silence simply allows failure to grow unnoticed. As your perspective changes, you also begin seeing something most employees never recognize. Managing people is not about controlling behavior. It's about creating an environment where trust and accountability can exist at the same time. Every decision affects morale, productivity, and culture in ways that spreadsheets can never measure. Psychology starts mattering as much as technical ability. The best leaders understand that every team is built on invisible emotional contracts. People don't just follow instructions, they follow leaders who are consistent, fair, and willing to make uncomfortable decisions for the good of everyone, not just the comfort of one individual. Over time, your definition of success quietly changes. You stop measuring your value by the work you personally complete and start measuring it by the people who become stronger because of your leadership. That shift is what separates management from leadership. Managers focus on completing tasks. Leaders multiply the potential of others. And the moment you realize your greatest responsibility is no longer producing results yourself, but creating an environment where others can consistently produce results without depending on you, you stop climbing the corporate ladder as an individual contributor and begin climbing it as someone capable of building leaders instead of simply managing employees. Another promotion arrives, but this one feels different. You're no longer responsible for a handful of people, you've become responsible for an entire function. The numbers are bigger, the meetings are longer, and the decisions reach far beyond the people you know personally. At first, you still try to lead the way you always have, believing every problem can be solved by working harder or caring more. Then, one afternoon, a spreadsheet lands on your desk. It contains salaries, budgets, forecasts, and one recommendation highlighted in red: eliminate a role. The employee behind that position isn't lazy. They haven't failed. In fact, they've done everything the company asked of them. But after a merger, a new technology, or a shift in strategy, the role itself no longer makes financial sense. For the first time in your career, you realize that organizations don't make decisions the way individuals do. A person asks, "Is this fair?" A system asks, "Is this sustainable?" Those questions often lead to very different answers. You spend days reviewing the numbers, searching for another solution, hoping there's a way to protect everyone. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. And that's when leadership begins changing you from the inside. You discover that every growing company operates like a living organism. Its first responsibility is survival. If one difficult decision today protects thousands of jobs tomorrow, the system will almost always choose the painful option. That realization is uncomfortable because it forces you to separate compassion from responsibility. You don't stop caring about people, you simply understand that caring alone cannot solve structural problems. The strongest leaders learn to hold two truths at the same time. They recognize the human cost behind every decision while accepting that avoiding necessary change often creates even greater damage in the future. This is also where you begin seeing organizations through a completely different lens. Every policy, budget, reporting line, and strategic priority exists because every system develops incentives that shape human behavior. People respond to what organizations measure, reward, and tolerate. Change those incentives, and behavior changes with them. Ignore them, and even the most talented employees eventually struggle against the system itself. That's why exceptional leaders stop asking, "Who made the mistake?" and begin asking, "What in the system allowed this mistake to happen?" Because fixing one person may solve today's problem, but improving the system prevents hundreds of future problems that never have the chance to appear. Looking back, this promotion wasn't really about managing larger teams or controlling bigger budgets. It was about learning one of the most difficult truths in business. Individual effort can build success, but only strong systems can sustain it. And the higher you climb, the less your job is to rescue people one by one, and the more your responsibility becomes designing systems where ordinary people can consistently achieve extraordinary results together. The title on your business card now says Director, and from the outside, it looks like you've finally reached the level where real influence begins. People assume you have more control than ever before. In reality, you've never been further away from the work that built your career. Your calendar is packed from morning to evening with strategy sessions, executive updates, budget reviews, and meetings about meetings. Every decision you make is based on reports, dashboards, presentations, and summaries prepared by layers of managers beneath you. One day, someone walks into your office and confidently tells you everything is on track. A week later, another report reveals a problem that has been growing for months without anyone recognizing its true scale. That's when an uncomfortable realization begins to settle in. The higher you climb, the less you actually see with your own eyes. Earlier in your career, you solved problems because you were close enough to touch them. Now you're expected to solve problems you've never personally witnessed. Leadership is no longer about having more information. It is about determining which information can actually be trusted. Every promotion adds another layer between you and reality, and every layer acts like a filter. Important details disappear. Context gets compressed. Bad news travels more slowly than good news because people naturally want to protect themselves, their teams, and their reputations. Without intending to, organizations create what psychologists call an information bubble, where leaders gradually receive cleaner, simpler versions of a much messier reality. This is why some of the biggest corporate failures in history were not caused by a lack of intelligence, but by leaders making perfectly rational decisions based on incomplete information. The map looked accurate, but the territory had already changed. Exceptional directors eventually understand that their greatest responsibility is not simply making decisions, it is building systems that allow uncomfortable truths to travel upward before they become expensive crises. They create environments where disagreement is safe, where frontline employees can challenge assumptions, and where bad news is rewarded for arriving early instead of punished for existing. They know that silence is often far more dangerous than failure because problems hidden inside organizations continue growing long after reports suggest everything is fine. At this level, humility quietly becomes one of the most valuable leadership skills. The more authority you gain, the more willing you must become to admit what you cannot see. The strongest leaders don't assume they have the clearest view from the top. They constantly search for blind spots, ask better questions, and surround themselves with people willing to tell them the truth instead of what they want to hear. Looking back, becoming a director was never about gaining more power. It was about accepting a paradox that defines every great leader. The higher you rise inside an organization, the less direct access you have to reality, and the more your success depends on your ability to uncover the truth hidden beneath layers of reports, assumptions, and carefully polished presentations. The promotion to vice president feels like the moment you've finally made it. Your name carries weight, executives seek your opinion, and decisions made in your office ripple across entire departments. From the outside, it looks like success has become effortless. But beneath the new title, something far more subtle begins to happen. Your identity starts changing in ways no one warns you about. It doesn't happen through one dramatic sacrifice. It happens through hundreds of ordinary Tuesdays. You cancel dinner because an operating review runs late. You promise your family you'll be fully present this weekend, only to spend half of Saturday answering emails marked urgent. You miss birthdays, postpone vacations, and convince yourself it's only temporary because the next promotion, the next quarter, or the next project will finally create balance. But somehow that moment never arrives. Without realizing it, your calendar begins making decisions before you do. Every available hour is allocated to the highest priority, and over time, work quietly becomes your default identity, rather than simply your profession. This is one of the hidden psychological effects of success. Human beings naturally adapt to whatever they repeatedly invest their time and attention in. The more responsibility you carry, the easier it becomes to confuse your role with who you are. Achievements become expectations, promotions become baselines, and the satisfaction that once lasted months now disappears within days. Psychologists call this the hedonic adaptation, affect the tendency for extraordinary accomplishments to quickly become ordinary, pushing us to chase the next milestone without ever asking whether it still aligns with the life we originally wanted. At this level, another invisible shift occurs. People stop giving you honest feedback as freely as they once did. The higher your position, the more likely others are to protect your confidence, agree with your opinions, or avoid difficult conversations altogether. Success can quietly isolate you, surrounding you with filtered information and polite agreement while making genuine honesty increasingly rare. That's why the most effective executives intentionally build relationships with people willing to challenge their thinking instead of simply validating it. They understand that leadership requires not only confidence, but constant self-correction. Eventually, you begin asking a question that rarely appears on performance reviews. Am I still building my life, or has my career quietly started building it for me? There is a profound difference. One is driven by conscious choice. The other is driven by momentum. Looking back, becoming a vice president was never just about managing larger budgets or leading more people. It was about discovering that the greatest cost of success is rarely measured in money or hours worked. It is measured in the slow transformation of your identity. Because the most dangerous thing about climbing higher isn't losing your free time, it's reaching the top one day and realizing you've become exceptionally successful at pursuing goals you never stopped long enough. Question. The wisest leaders understand that promotions should expand your life, not quietly replace it. They schedule time with the same discipline they schedule meetings, protect the relationships that existed before the title, and regularly step back to ask a question that no company can answer for them. If everything I am building succeeds, will it still be the life I truly wanted? By the time you reach the executive level, the hardest part of leadership is no longer making decisions, it is carrying information that almost no one else is allowed to know. One morning, you walk into a boardroom with a folder that contains plans capable of changing thousands of lives. A restructuring is coming. An acquisition is being negotiated. A new strategy will reshape entire departments. Yet, when you leave the meeting, you pass employees in the hallway who smile, ask about your weekend, and continue working as if nothing is about to change. They trust that if something important were happening, someone would tell them. You wish it were that simple. But at this level, leadership operates under a completely different set of rules. Every piece of information has a timeline. Legal obligations, regulatory requirements, investor expectations, competitive strategy, and market sensitivity determine not only what can be shared, but exactly when it can be shared. You quickly discover one of the greatest paradoxes of executive leadership. Telling the truth is not always the same as telling the whole truth. Sometimes revealing information too early can destroy negotiations, create unnecessary panic, violate securities regulations, or put thousands of jobs at even greater risk. From the outside, silence often looks like secrecy. From the inside, it can feel like responsibility. This is where leadership becomes emotionally heavier than intellectually difficult. You begin carrying conversations you cannot repeat, decisions you cannot fully explain, and consequences that will only make sense months later. Psychologists describe this as the burden of asymmetric information, the stress that comes from knowing far more than the people around you while being unable to reduce their uncertainty. Over time, you realize that incomplete information doesn't only affect employees. It affects you as well. Every report reaching your desk is itself a summary of someone else's reality. Every recommendation has already passed through layers of interpretation, incentives, and assumptions before it reaches your office. You are constantly making high-impact decisions based on information that is accurate, yet never complete. That's why exceptional executives become less obsessed with having all the answers and more obsessed with asking better questions. They know that certainty is often an illusion, and that good judgment comes from recognizing what remains unknown as much as understanding what is already known. They build cultures where difficult truths travel upward quickly, where disagreement is welcomed instead of punished, and where people feel safe raising problems before they become crises. because every organization eventually pays for the information it chooses to ignore. Looking back, becoming an executive was never about gaining unlimited authority. It was about accepting that leadership at the highest level is an exercise in navigating uncertainty with incomplete maps and imperfect timing. The public sees confident decisions. They rarely see the unanswered questions behind them. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is this: true leadership is not measured by how much information you possess, but by how wisely you act when you know you will never possess all of it. One morning, you walk into the boardroom carrying a decision that will affect more lives than you could have imagined when you first stepped into the company as an intern. Around the table sit directors, advisors, lawyers, and executives, each studying projections that stretch years into the future. The numbers are clear. If nothing changes, the company will slowly lose its competitive advantage. If the proposed restructuring moves forward, thousands of jobs will disappear, but tens of thousands more may survive. On paper, it looks like a rational decision. In reality, every row in that spreadsheet represents someone's mortgage, someone's child's education, someone's retirement, and someone's future. This is the moment when you discover the true difference between management and executive leadership. Earlier in your career, your decisions affected projects. Now they shape lives, communities, suppliers, investors, customers, and employees you've never met. At this level, there are rarely good choices. There are only choices with different consequences. The public often imagines that CEOs possess complete control, but the truth is almost the opposite. Every decision is constrained by market conditions, shareholder expectations, regulations, technological disruption, and economic uncertainty. Leadership at this scale isn't about choosing between success and failure. It's about choosing which risks the organization can survive and which it cannot. This is why the emotional burden of the role is so difficult to explain. You may spend months studying every possible scenario, consulting experts, challenging assumptions, and searching for alternatives, only to realize that every available option still hurts someone. The responsibility is not simply making the decision, it's accepting that no decision is free from unintended consequences. Behavioral economists often describe this as decision-making under uncertainty, where perfect information never exists and every outcome carries trade-offs that only become visible in hindsight. Great CEOs understand that waiting for certainty is often the most dangerous decision of all. While others hope for perfect conditions, they act with incomplete information, guided by probabilities, principles, and long-term thinking rather than short-term comfort. Yet the greatest leaders never allow data to erase their humanity. They understand that behind every metric is a person, behind every budget is a family, and behind every strategic shift is a story that will never appear in the quarterly report. They communicate honestly, take responsibility publicly, and resist the temptation to blame markets, competitors, or circumstances when difficult choices must be made. Over time, they also learn that trust becomes their most valuable asset. Employees may not always agree with painful decisions, but they will remember whether those decisions were made with transparency, consistency, and genuine respect for the people affected. Looking back, becoming a CEO was never about reaching the highest office in the company. It was about carrying the weight of choices that few people fully understand. Because the higher you climb, the less leadership becomes about personal achievement, and the more it becomes about stewardship, protecting an institution that will outlive you, while making decisions that balance today's sacrifices against tomorrow's. Survival. And perhaps that is the final paradox of leadership. The greatest power is not the ability to control thousands of lives, but the willingness to accept responsibility for decisions that will shape them long after your own name is forgotten. Years ago, you believed leadership meant making the final decision. Now, as chairman, you rarely make any of them. The office is quieter than it has ever been. Your calendar is no longer filled with operational meetings, hiring decisions, or budget reviews. Instead, you spend your days asking questions that may not reveal their true impact for years. A young CEO walks into your office seeking advice on a difficult acquisition. Another executive asks whether the company should enter an entirely new market. You could simply tell them what to do. After all, you've solved similar problems countless times before. But you don't. Instead, you ask a series of questions that force them to think more deeply than they ever have. Because at this stage, you've learned that the highest form of leadership is not creating followers. It is creating leaders who no longer depend on you. This is where power undergoes its final transformation. Earlier in your career, authority came from control. You approved budgets, hired executives, and made decisions that shaped daily operations. But now you realize that control is temporary, while influence can outlive an entire generation of managers. The greatest organizations in history were never built around one extraordinary individual. They were built on systems, principles, and cultures capable of surviving long after their founders stepped away. That realization changes everything. Your responsibility is no longer to solve today's problems. It is to ensure the institution can solve tomorrow's problems without you. Every conversation becomes an investment in people rather than projects. Every board meeting becomes an opportunity to strengthen governance instead of exercising authority. Every decision is evaluated not by whether it produces immediate results, but by whether it improves the organization's ability to make wise decisions decades into the future. This shift reflects one of the deepest principles of leadership. The value of a leader is measured less by what they accomplish personally and more by what continues to thrive after they are gone. History repeatedly shows that organizations built around one indispensable person often struggle once that person leaves. Organizations built around strong values, disciplined systems, and capable successors continue growing because leadership has become embedded in the institution itself rather than concentrated in a single individual. That is why the wisest chairmen spend more time selecting and developing future leaders than protecting their own authority. They understand that succession is not the end of leadership, it is its ultimate test. If the company weakens the moment you leave, then your leadership created dependence instead of strength. If it grows stronger without you, then you've built something far greater than a successful career, you've built an enduring institution. Looking back across every promotion, every achievement, and every title, you realize that influence is the only form of power that truly compounds. Money can disappear, authority can be taken away, positions eventually belong to someone else. But the principles you teach, the culture you shape, and the leaders you develop continue making decisions long after your name has disappeared from the organizational chart. And perhaps that is the final lesson of the corporate ladder. The greatest leaders are remembered not because they controlled the future, but because they prepared others to build it without them. When you look back across every stage of the corporate ladder, something unexpected becomes impossible to ignore. Every promotion gave you exactly what it promised: a higher salary, greater authority, more influence, bigger opportunities. Yet every promotion also came with a second contract that no one asked you to sign. It was written in invisible ink. Every new title quietly demanded something in return. First, it asked for a little more of your time. Then it asked for your evenings. Later, your weekends. Eventually, it began asking for your attention, your relationships, your peace of mind, and sometimes even your sense of identity. The strange part is that none of these sacrifices happen all at once. They arrive so gradually that they feel completely reasonable. You tell yourself this project is only temporary. This quarter will be unusually busy. After this promotion, things will slow down. But years pass, and the finish line keeps moving further away. Without realizing it, you stop building a career to support your life and begin building your life around your career. This is one of the oldest psychological traps in human ambition. We naturally assume that reaching the next milestone will finally create satisfaction. Yet as each goal becomes reality, our expectations quietly rise with it. What once felt extraordinary soon becomes normal, and the pursuit begins again. Success itself isn't the trap. Unquestioned momentum is. The corporate ladder was designed to reward competence, discipline, and responsibility. In many ways, it does exactly that. But no organization can decide what success should ultimately mean for you. It can offer promotions, bonuses, titles, and recognition, but it cannot answer the only question that truly matters. Is the life you're building still the one you actually want? The most fulfilled leaders eventually understand that every decision carries an opportunity cost. Every yes to one path is also a quiet no to countless others. More responsibility may create greater influence, but it can also reduce freedom. More recognition may expand your reputation while shrinking your privacy. More authority may increase your ability to shape an organization while leaving less time to shape your own life. Wisdom comes from recognizing these trade-offs before they become regrets. That's why the people who reach the top with the fewest regrets are rarely those who climb the fastest. They're the ones who periodically stopped long enough to question the direction of the ladder itself. They measured success not only by promotions earned, but by relationships preserved, health protected, curiosity maintained, and the freedom to choose how they spent their time. They understood that careers are meant to be powerful tools, not permanent identities. Titles eventually belong to someone else. Offices are reassigned, Business cards are replaced. Organizational charts change. But the person you become while pursuing success remains with you long after every promotion has been forgotten. In the end, the corporate ladder is neither good nor bad. It is simply a path. Whether that path leads to fulfillment or quiet regret depends on one decision that no company, manager, or board of directors can ever make for you. So before you chase the next title, the next raise, or the next office with a better view, pause for a moment and ask yourself a question that becomes more valuable with every promotion. If I succeed beyond my greatest expectations, will I still recognize the person waiting for me at the top? Because the greatest achievement is not reaching the highest position in the building. It is reaching the end of your career knowing that, somewhere along the way, you never lost ownership of your own life.